The rope around Katherine Turner's wrists cut into her skin as she stumbled forward through the dusty street of Redemption Creek, her once fine dress now torn and stained with the red dirt of the Arizona Territory. The year was 1876, and Katherine's world had collapsed into a nightmare of bound hands and the jeers of onlookers who lined the wooden boardwalks of the frontier town. "Keep moving, girl," growled the man who held the other end of the rope. Jebediah Holt was a slave trader who operated in the shadows of the law, dealing in desperate women and broken men. His massive frame blocked out the scorching sun as he yanked the rope again, causing Katherine to stumble and fall to her knees. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from days without adequate water. "I'm not merchandise, I'm a free woman." Holt's laugh was as dry as the desert surrounding them. "Not anymore, you ain't. Your daddy's debts make you mine to sell. The gentlemen at the wayside saloon are mighty eager to bid on a pretty thing like you." Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up to them both, but she never imagined he would sign away her freedom as collateral. Now he was dead from a bullet in a card game dispute, and she was left to pay his debts with her own life. A crowd had begun to gather at the edge of town where a makeshift auction block had been assembled. Men with hard eyes and weathered faces stood in small groups, some already pulling out money pouches to count their cash. Katherine felt her stomach turn. These weren't the kind of men who wanted a wife, they wanted something to use and discard. From the opposite end of the street, a lone rider appeared. His silhouette wavered in the heat rising from the ground, but as he drew closer, Katherine could make out a tall figure atop a powerful black stallion. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a worn leather hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jawline shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. Isaac Daniels had been riding for 3 days straight, chasing rumors of a gang that had been rustling cattle from ranches throughout the territory. As the newly appointed deputy marshal for the region, it was his job to maintain some semblance of law in a land where justice often came from the barrel of a gun rather than a courtroom. He hadn't planned to stop in Redemption Creek, but his horse needed rest, and he needed something stronger than water to wash the trail dust from his throat. As he approached the town's main street, the gathering crowd caught his attention. Public spectacles in frontier towns usually meant trouble, hangings, fights, or worse. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. A woman, bound and clearly terrified, was being displayed like livestock while men called out crude remarks and laughed. Isaac pulled his horse to a stop, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. He wore no badge, it was safer that way when tracking outlaws, but the law was etched into his very being. He had seen too much suffering during the war and had promised himself he would never stand by while innocents were harmed. "What's going on here?" he called out, his voice carrying the weight of authority even without the badge to back it up. Holt turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Private business, stranger. Move along unless you're looking to bid." Isaac dismounted, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dirt. He was a tall man, lean but muscular from years of hard work and harder riding. His eyes, a piercing blue that seemed to cut through the haze of dust and smoke, fixed on the trader. "Looks like you're holding an auction for a human being," Isaac said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Last I checked, the 13th Amendment made that illegal." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some men backed away, suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. Others stood their ground, curious to see how this confrontation would play out. Holt spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "This ain't slavery, Marshal. I can tell by your stance you're some kind of lawman. This here's a debt collection. Her pa owed me and she's the payment, legal as whiskey in a saloon." Isaac's eyes shifted to Katherine. Her green eyes, though filled with fear, held a defiance that spoke of inner strength. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins and framed a face that, despite the dirt and exhaustion, was strikingly beautiful. But it was the dignity with which she held herself, even bound and humiliated, that stirred something in him. "How much?" Isaac asked, his voice flat. Holt's eyes narrowed suspiciously. $200, but the bidding starts at 50. Without hesitation, Isaac reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out $200 in gold coins, nearly 3 months' salary, and held it out to Holt. "I'm not bidding," he said. "I'm buying her freedom." A shocked silence fell over the crowd. Even Holt seemed taken aback. "You're paying full price without even a bid?" Holt asked incredulously. Isaac's eyes never wavered. "I'm paying what you claim she's worth to settle the debt." "Now cut her loose." Holt hesitated, clearly calculating whether he could get more money from an auction. But something in Isaac's stance, the way his hand hovered near his gun, the steel in his eyes, made him reconsider. He snatched the money and quickly counted it. "She's all yours," Holt said with a shrug, tossing the end of the rope to Isaac. "Do what you want with her." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the entertainment had been cut short. Isaac approached Katherine slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. He pulled a knife from his boot and carefully cut the ropes binding her wrists. "You're free, miss," he said quietly. "No strings attached." Katherine rubbed her raw wrists, looking up at him with confusion and wariness. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Isaac holstered his knife. No decent man could stand by and watch what was happening. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Katherine glanced around at the town that had been prepared to watch her be sold like cattle. "No," she admitted. "My father is dead and we were just passing through when—" Her voice trailed off. Isaac nodded, understanding her predicament. "There's a respectable boarding house at the edge of town. I can take you there, get you a room for the night, then you can decide what to do next." Katherine hesitated, still not fully trusting this stranger's kindness. "And what do you expect in return?" Isaac's expression softened slightly. "Nothing, miss. Despite what you've seen today, there are still some men who do the right thing simply because it's right." For the first time since her ordeal began, Katherine felt a flicker of hope. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels, Isaac Daniels. And you are Katherine Turner," she replied, managing a small, grateful smile that, despite everything, lit up her entire face. Neither of them could have known in that moment that Isaac had purchased far more than Katherine's freedom that day. In the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, with the sun setting fire to the distant mountains, he had set in motion events that would ultimately claim his heart as well. Mrs. Abigail Holloway's boarding house stood 2 stories tall at the eastern edge of Redemption Creek, its white painted exterior and neatly tended garden a stark contrast to the rough-hewn buildings that comprised most of the town. Isaac tied his horse to the hitching post and helped Katherine down from where she had been riding behind him, her hands lightly resting on his waist for balance. "Mrs. Holloway runs a strict establishment," Isaac explained as they approached the front door, "but she's fair and discreet. You'll be safe here." Katherine's legs were unsteady after the ride and she stumbled slightly. Isaac caught her elbow to steady her, the brief contact sending an unexpected jolt through them both. Katherine quickly straightened, regaining her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels, but I don't have any money to pay for lodging," she said, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Everything I had was taken by Mr. Holt." Isaac's expression remained impassive, but his eyes were kind. "I'll take care of it. Consider it part of your—" He hesitated, not wanting to say purchase. "My rescue," Katherine supplied, a hint of wry humor in her voice despite her circumstances. A ghost of a smile touched Isaac's lips. "Something like that, Mrs. Holloway answered the door, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, spectacles perched on her nose. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Katherine's disheveled appearance, but to her credit, she asked no questions when Isaac requested a room for the lady who's had some misfortune. After Isaac paid for a week's lodging in advance, Mrs. Holloway led Katherine upstairs, promising a hot bath and clean clothes. Before following, Katherine turned back to Isaac. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Daniels." Isaac shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "No thanks needed, Miss Turner. Just take care of yourself." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Will I see you again?" The question escaped her lips before she could consider the propriety of it. Isaac paused, looking back at her. For a moment, he seemed to be weighing his response carefully. I'll check on you tomorrow, make sure you're settling in all right." With that, he was gone, the door closing behind him. Katherine stood in the entryway, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. Mrs. Holloway reappeared, clucking sympathetically. "Come along, dear. Let's get you cleaned up and fed. Whatever trouble you're in, it'll look better after a hot meal and a good night's sleep." The next morning, Katherine awoke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. The room Mrs. Holloway had provided was small but clean, with simple furniture and floral-patterned wallpaper. A dress had been laid out at the foot of the bed, modest and slightly faded, but clean and whole, unlike her own torn garments. After dressing and pinning up her hair as best she could without proper hairpins, Katherine made her way downstairs. Mrs. Holloway was in the dining room, serving breakfast to two elderly gentlemen who appeared to be permanent residents. "Ah, there you are, Miss Turner," Mrs. Holloway said. "Have a seat. You must be famished." Katherine hadn't realized how hungry she was until the plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits was placed before her. She ate with as much restraint as she could muster, though she wanted nothing more than to devour the food like a starving animal. "Your Mr. Daniels was by earlier, Mrs. Holloway mentioned casually as she refilled Katherine's coffee cup. Katherine nearly choked on her biscuit. "He's not my Mr. Daniels," she corrected quickly. Mrs. Holloway's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "Of course, dear. In any case, he left something for you." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Katherine opened it to find a hairbrush, a packet of hairpins, a small bottle of rose-scented water, and most surprisingly, a modest sum of money. A note was tucked inside. "Miss Turner, these items might help you feel more yourself. The money should allow you some independence while you decide your next steps. I'll return this evening if you wish to discuss your options. Respectfully, I. Daniels." Katherine stared at the note, then at the items. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. No one had shown her such consideration since her mother died 3 years ago. "He seems like a good man," Mrs. Holloway observed, watching Katherine's reaction. "I hardly know him," Katherine replied, carefully folding the note. "He could be anyone." "He's Deputy Marshal Isaac Daniels," Mrs. Holloway said matter-of-factly. "Been keeping the peace in this territory for almost 2 years now. Before that, he fought in the war Union side. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair to everyone. Never known him to take a special interest in anyone passing through, though." She raised an eyebrow meaningfully. Katherine felt a flush creeping up her neck. "He was simply being kind." $200 is quite a bit more than simply kind, my dear," Mrs. Holloway replied. When Katherine looked up in surprise, she added, "News travels fast in small towns, especially news involving Jebediah Holt getting shown up by a lawman." Katherine spent the day restlessly pacing her room and the small garden behind the boarding house. With the money Isaac had provided, she could perhaps buy a stagecoach ticket to Sacramento, where her mother's sister lived. She hadn't seen Aunt Meredith in years, but she might be willing to take Katherine in until she could establish herself, yet something held her back from making immediate plans to leave. She told herself it was prudent to rest and recover before undertaking another journey. It had nothing to do with the deputy marshal who had rescued her, whose blue eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. As promised, Isaac returned that evening. Mrs. Holloway showed him to the small parlor and then discreetly withdrew, though Katherine suspected the older woman was listening from just outside the door. Isaac had cleaned up since the previous day. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He wore a clean shirt under his leather vest, though he still carried his gun belt. When Katherine entered the room, he stood quickly, removing his hat. "Miss Turner," he greeted her. "You're looking better." Katherine touched her hair self-consciously. She had used the hairbrush and pins he'd provided to style it properly. "Thanks to your thoughtfulness, Mr. Daniels. I can't accept the money, though." Isaac frowned slightly. "It's not charity if that's what concerns you. Consider it an advance." An advance, Katherine repeated, confused. Isaac nodded. I spoke with Doc Miller today. His wife needs help running their medical practice, keeping records, tending to patients when the doctor's busy. It's respectable work, and they can provide a room at the back of their office if you'd prefer not to stay here. Katherine stared at him, incredulous. You found me a position. Why would you go to such trouble for a complete stranger? Isaac looked uncomfortable, as if the question forced him to examine motivations he preferred not to analyze too closely. This territory needs good people, Miss Turner. You seem like one of them, and after what happened with Holt. Well, a new start might be welcome. Katherine sank into a chair, overwhelmed by his continued generosity. I don't know what to say. Say you'll at least meet with Mrs. Miller before deciding to leave town, Isaac replied, sitting across from her. Unless you have firm plans elsewhere, Katherine thought of Aunt Meredith, whom she barely remembered. The prospect of arriving unannounced on her doorstep after so many years seemed suddenly daunting compared to staying in Redemption Creek, where at least one person had shown her kindness. I'll meet with her, Katherine agreed. Relief flickered across Isaac's face so briefly she almost missed it. Good, I can take you there tomorrow morning if that suits you. They fell into an awkward silence, neither quite knowing how to proceed. Finally, Katherine spoke. You never told me why you were in Redemption Creek yesterday. Isaac's expression turned serious. I'm tracking a gang that's been rustling cattle and robbing stagecoaches throughout the territory. Their leader is a man named Victor Reese. Word is they might be heading this way. Is that dangerous for you? Katherine asked, surprising herself with how much the answer mattered to her. A shadow passed over Isaac's features. It's my job, Miss Turner, but yes, Reese is not a man to be taken lightly. He stood abruptly. I should let you rest. I'll come by around 9 tomorrow morning. As he reached the door, Katherine called after him. Mr. Daniels, he turned back. Thank you. Not just for yesterday, but for all of this. I won't forget it. Something softened in his eyes. Get some rest, Miss Turner. Tomorrow's a new beginning. After he left, Katherine remained in the parlor, her thoughts in turmoil. She had come to the Arizona territory with her father seeking a fresh start after her mother's death, only to find herself bound and nearly sold to the highest bidder. Now, against all odds, she was being offered another chance, one that came with the unsettling awareness that her rescuer was a man who stirred feelings she had never experienced before. She told herself it was merely gratitude, nothing more. It couldn't be anything more, could it? The Millers' medical practice was housed in a modest building on the main street of Redemption Creek. Dr. Thomas Miller was a kindly man in his 50s with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard. His wife, Eleanor, was younger by perhaps 10 years, with a brisk, efficient manner that Katherine immediately respected. So you have no medical training? Eleanor asked as she showed Katherine around the office. No, madam, Katherine admitted, but I'm a quick learner. I kept all the accounts for my father's business, and I have steady hands. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Deputy Daniels speaks highly of you, and he's not a man given to exaggeration. We can't pay much, but as he may have mentioned, we can offer room and board in addition to a small wage. Katherine glanced at Isaac, who stood near the door, his expression carefully neutral. The deputy has been very kind, but he hardly knows me. I know enough, Isaac said quietly. You didn't break even when you had every reason to. His words warmed something inside her. Katherine turned back to Eleanor. I would be honored to accept the position, Mrs. Miller. After finalizing the arrangements, Isaac walked Katherine back to the boarding house to collect her few belongings. They moved in comfortable silence until Katherine gathered the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. How long will you be in Redemption Creek, Mr. Daniels? Isaac's stride faltered slightly. Hard to say, depends on Reese and his gang. Could be days, could be weeks. Katherine nodded, trying not to reveal her disappointment at the uncertainty. Of course, your work must take you all over the territory. It does, he acknowledged. But I'm based here. I have a small cabin just outside town. The knowledge that he wasn't just passing through brought Katherine more relief than she cared to admit. Then perhaps I'll see you around town from time to time. Isaac looked down at her, and for a moment his carefully maintained reserve slipped. I'd like that, Miss Turner. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Katherine settled into her new role at the miller's practice. She proved to be a natural at calming anxious patients and keeping the office running smoothly. Dr. Miller began teaching her basic medical skills: how to clean and bandage wounds, administer certain medicines, and recognize common illnesses. Isaac came by the practice regularly, sometimes with legitimate injuries or ailments, sometimes with transparent excuses that made Eleanor Miller hide knowing smiles. Katherine found herself looking forward to these visits, her pulse quickening whenever the bell above the door announced his arrival. On a particularly busy morning, Katherine was alone in the front office when the door burst open. A miner stumbled in, supporting a young boy of about 12 whose arm was bent at an unnatural angle. "Doc around?" the miner asked urgently. "My boy Timmy fell down a mine shaft. His arms broke for sure, maybe worse." "Dr. Miller is out on a house call," Katherine replied, immediately moving to help the boy to an examination table. "But I can help until he returns." She assessed the boy's injuries with the calm efficiency she had learned from watching Dr. Miller. The arm was indeed broken, but there was no sign of internal bleeding or head injury. Katherine gave the boy laudanum for the pain, then carefully splinted the arm as she had seen the doctor do. She was just finishing when Isaac entered, stopping short at the sight before him. "Miss Turner," he said, taking in the situation. "Do you need help?" Katherine looked up, strands of auburn hair escaping from her usually neat bun. "Deputy Daniels, Dr. Miller should be back soon, but perhaps you could fetch Mrs. Miller from the mercantile. The boy needs proper medical attention." Isaac nodded and disappeared, returning minutes later with Eleanor Miller, who took over the care of young Timmy. As the crisis subsided, Isaac drew Katherine aside. "You handled that well," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. Katherine smoothed her apron, suddenly self-conscious. "I merely did what I've seen Dr. Miller do." "You did more than that," Isaac insisted. "You stayed calm when most would have panicked. You have a gift for healing, Katherine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver through her. "Thank you, Isaac," she replied softly, testing the sound of his name on her lips. A charged moment passed between them, broken when Eleanor called for Katherine's assistance. Isaac tipped his hat and stepped back. "I should let you get back to work," he said. "But I was wondering if you might join me for dinner tomorrow evening. There's a restaurant at the hotel that serves decent food." Katherine felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "I would like that very much." Isaac's smile transformed his usually serious face. "I'll call for you at 6 then." After he left, Eleanor approached Katherine with a knowing look. "About time he asked you properly," she said. "The man's been making excuses to come in here almost every day." "He's just being kind," Katherine protested, though her heart wasn't in the denial. Eleanor snorted. "Deputy Daniels has many fine qualities, but he's never been one to pay social calls just to be kind. He's sweet on you, girl, plain as day." Katherine couldn't suppress the smile that spread across her face. The prospect of dinner with Isaac filled her with a nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. Perhaps, she thought, Redemption Creek was living up to its name after all. The Territorial Hotel's restaurant was the finest establishment in Redemption Creek, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented the height of sophistication for the frontier town. When Katherine entered on Isaac's arm, wearing a borrowed dress from Eleanor Miller, heads turned. Word of her near auction and subsequent rescue had spread, and curiosity about the relationship between the taciturn deputy marshal and the newcomer ran high. Isaac seemed oblivious to the stares as he held Katherine's chair. He had dressed for the occasion in a proper suit coat over his usual attire, his dark hair neatly combed. Without his gun, belt, and hat, he looked younger, less formidable. "You look beautiful tonight," he said as he took his seat opposite her. Katherine smoothed the blue cotton dress self-consciously. "Mrs. Miller was kind enough to lend me the dress. I fear I didn't bring much suitable attire in my travels." "It's not the dress," Isaac said with uncharacteristic boldness. "It's you." Katherine looked down, flustered by the compliment. "You're too kind, Isaac." Kind isn't a word most people would use to describe me, he replied with a hint of wryness. Ask anyone in town, they'll tell you I'm fair but stern, not one for socializing. Yet here you are, Katherine observed, meeting his gaze. Isaac's expression softened. Here I am. Dinner was a revelation for both of them. Away from the context of Katherine's rescue or the medical practice, they discovered a natural ease in each other's company. Isaac spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service during the Civil War, and his decision to head west afterward, seeking purpose in the untamed territories. I saw too much death during the war, he explained, his eyes distant with memories. Wanted to be part of building something instead of destroying it. Out here, the law means something. It's the difference between civilization and chaos. Katherine understood his need for order and purpose. After my mother died, my father became restless. He was always chasing the next opportunity, the next big strike. I think he was really running from grief, but it only led him deeper into trouble. Is that how you ended up with Holt? Isaac asked carefully. Katherine nodded, the memory still painful. Father borrowed money for a mining venture. When it failed, he gambled to try to win enough to pay it back. That only made things worse. Holt was his final creditor. She paused, then added quietly, Father was shot in a dispute over cards. His last act was to sign me over to cover his debt. Isaac's hand moved across the table to cover hers. I'm sorry, Katherine. No one should have to endure what you did. The warmth of his touch sent tingles up her arm. If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here now, she said. Sometimes the worst circumstances lead to unexpected blessings. Their eyes held, and in that moment, something shifted between them. This was no longer just gratitude or casual interest. It was something deeper, something with the potential to change both their lives. The spell was broken by a commotion at the front of the restaurant. A man burst in, scanning the room frantically until his eyes landed on Isaac. Deputy, come quick. Riders coming into town looks like Reese's gang. Isaac was on his feet instantly, his expression transforming from tender to vigilant in the blink of an eye. Get everyone off the streets, he ordered, and send word to Sheriff Barnes in Tucson if you can. He turned to Katherine, conflict evident in his face. I have to go, I know, she said, rising as well. Be careful, Isaac. He hesitated, then in a move that shocked both of them, he leaned down and pressed a swift, fierce kiss to her lips. Stay inside, no matter what you hear. Then he was gone, striding purposefully toward the danger that threatened the town. Katherine stood frozen, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. The hotel owner hurriedly ushered all diners away from the windows as the sound of multiple horses thundered down the main street. Katherine allowed herself to be led to a back room, but her thoughts remained with Isaac, facing unknown danger alone. The next hours were the longest of Katherine's life. Gunshots echoed through the town, followed by shouts and the crash of breaking glass. Fire broke out somewhere she could smell the smoke, and panic spread among those sheltering in the hotel. When Dr. Miller arrived seeking her help with the wounded, Katherine didn't hesitate. Despite Isaac's warning to stay inside, she couldn't remain idle while people needed medical attention. The scene at the medical office was chaotic. Several townspeople had been injured in the crossfire, and Dr. Miller was working frantically to save a young man with a bullet in his chest. Alina directed Katherine to tend to the less serious cases, cuts, bruises, and minor gunshot wounds. Katherine worked steadily, her hands sure despite her racing heart. Each time the door opened, she looked up, hoping to see Isaac. But as the night wore on with no sign of him, fear began to gnaw at her. It was past midnight when Sheriff Barnes arrived from Tucson with a posse of 6 men. The shooting had stopped by then, but smoke still hung in the air and parts of the town smoldered in the darkness. Where's Deputy Daniels? The sheriff demanded as he entered the medical office. No one knew. Isaac hadn't been seen since he left to confront the gang. Katherine's stomach knotted with dread. I'll find him, she said, untying her blood-stained apron. Miss Turner, it's not safe, Dr. Miller began. I have to, she interrupted, a new determination in her voice. Please tell me where to look. Sheriff Barnes studied her with narrowed eyes. The fighting was worst at the north end of town, near the livery stable. But miss, my men will search. Catherine was already heading for the door. Your men don't know him like I do. The night air was cool against her skin as she hurried through the darkened streets. Redemption Creek looked like a battlefield, windows shattered, doors splintered, goods from the mercantile scattered across the dirt road. The livery stable had partially burned, though someone had managed to extinguish the flames before they consumed the entire structure. Isaac. She called, her voice echoing in the eerie quiet. Isaac, can you hear me? A groan from behind a water trough caught her attention. Catherine rushed forward, her heart in her throat, to find Isaac slumped against the side of the stable. Blood darkened his shirt and his face was ashen in the moonlight. Catherine, he whispered as she knelt beside him, told you to stay inside. And leave you to bleed to death, she retorted, quickly examining his wounds. A bullet had grazed his side and he had a deep cut on his arm, but neither injury appeared life-threatening. It was the bullet hole in his thigh that concerned her most. It was still bleeding steadily. Can you walk if I help you? She asked, already tearing strips from her petticoat to fashion a temporary bandage. Isaac grimaced as she tied the cloth tightly around his thigh. Reese, I don't know, Catherine admitted. The sheriff is here now. We need to get you to Dr. Miller. With considerable effort, she helped Isaac to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, his arm across her shoulders, as they made their slow way back to the medical office. Why did you come looking for me? Isaac asked through gritted teeth as they paused for him to catch his breath. Catherine looked up at him, the answer so obvious she didn't need to consider it. Because I love you, she said simply. Isaac stared at her, pain momentarily forgotten. Catherine, you don't have to say anything, she hurried on. I know it's sudden and perhaps foolish, but these past weeks, and tonight when I thought I might lose you. Isaac's free hand came up to cup her cheek. It's not foolish, he said softly. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing proud despite everything. I just never thought a woman like you could feel the same for a man like me. Catherine turned her face to press a kiss to his palm. Then we've both been fools. Their second kiss, shared in the middle of a battle-scarred street with Isaac bleeding and Catherine supporting most of his weight, lacked the romantic setting of moonlit gardens or candlelit dinners. But to Catherine, it was perfect, a pledge made in adversity, sealed with the promise of healing and hope. Dr. Miller's reaction when they stumbled into his office was a mixture of relief and exasperation. Deputy Daniels, we thought you might be dead, and Miss Turner running off like that. Both of you will be the death of me. As the doctor worked to remove the bullet from Isaac's thigh, Catherine refused to leave his side. She held his hand through the painful procedure, her presence a comfort that allowed him to endure without laudanum, which he refused. I need a clear head, he insisted. Reese is still out there. Not anymore, Sheriff Barnes said, entering the room. Found him and 2 of his men dead at the edge of town. Looks like you got him before he got you, Deputy. Relief washed over Isaac's face. And the rest of the gang. 3 more captured, 2 escaped, but without Reese they won't be much trouble. You did good work tonight, Daniels. The territory owes you a debt. Catherine squeezed Isaac's hand, pride mingling with the fear she still felt at how close she had come to losing him. Recovery was slow and often frustrating for a man accustomed to constant activity. Isaac chafed at being confined to bed, then to the medical office, then to short walks through town. Catherine became not only his nurse but his anchor, her steady presence calming his restless spirit. They spoke often of the future during those weeks of recovery. Isaac had saved a modest sum from his deputy's salary, enough to put a down payment on a small ranch outside of town if he decided to leave law enforcement. I've been thinking about it for a while, he admitted to Catherine as they sat on the porch of the Miller's residence one evening. The territory's getting more civilized. They'll want marshals with formal training soon, not ex-soldiers who learned on the job. What would you raise on this hypothetical ranch? Catherine asked, her hand comfortably entwined with his. Horses, maybe. I've always had a way with them. He paused, looking out at the sunset painting the distant mountains gold and crimson, but I wouldn't want to do it alone. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. No, Isaac turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. Catherine, I know it hasn't been long, nearly 2 months since you paid for my freedom, she interjected with a small smile. 2 months, he agreed. Not long by most standards, but out here life moves differently. We face death more readily, make decisions more quickly. He took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I love you. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes. Are you asking me to marry you, Deputy Daniels? Isaac nodded, suddenly solemn. I am. I don't have much to offer besides hard work and a heart that's yours completely, but I promise to spend every day making sure you never regret giving me your freedom and your heart. Yes, Catherine whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Yes, I will marry you, Isaac. Their kiss was gentle but filled with promise, the promise of a shared future, of healing old wounds, of building something beautiful from the ashes of their separate pasts. They were married 2 weeks later in Redemption Creek's small church. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the union of the stern deputy and the woman he had rescued from auction. Dr. and Mrs. Miller stood as witnesses, their faces beaming with approval. Catherine wore a new dress that the women of the town had helped her make, a simple gown of ivory cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Isaac wore his best suit, standing tall and straight despite the lingering stiffness in his injured leg. As they exchanged vows, Catherine reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. The darkest day of her life had ultimately brought her to the greatest happiness she had ever known. Perhaps that was the true meaning of redemption, finding light in the darkest places. Love where you least expected it. After the ceremony, as guests gathered for the modest reception at the hotel, Sheriff Barnes approached the couple with news. Got word from the territorial governor, he said, shaking Isaac's hand. They're offering you the position of full marshal for the Northern District. Higher pay, more authority, say they need men with your experience and judgment. Isaac glanced at Catherine, a question in his eyes. They had spoken of leaving law enforcement, of starting fresh on their own land. But she could see the spark of interest in his expression, the call of duty that was so fundamental to who he was. It's your decision, she said, squeezing his hand. I'll support whatever you choose. Isaac turned back to the sheriff. Tell the governor I'm honored, but I'll need to establish a permanent office here in Redemption Creek. My wife and I are putting down roots. The following spring found Catherine and Isaac settled in a small house on the outskirts of town. Isaac split his time between his marshal duties and the 10 acres of land they had purchased, where he was slowly building up a stable of quality horses. Catherine continued to work with Dr. Miller 3 days a week, her medical knowledge growing under his tutelage. On a warm May evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Catherine placed Isaac's hand on her slightly rounded belly. I think we'll need to add a room to the house, she said softly. Isaac's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Catherine, are you saying? She nodded, joy illuminating her face. Around Christmas, Dr. Miller thinks. Isaac gathered her into his arms, his face buried in her hair to hide the tears that threatened. A baby, he whispered, our baby. Catherine held him tightly, marveling at how complete her happiness had become. From the depths of despair on that dusty street where she had been bound and dragged toward auction, she had found not only freedom but a love beyond anything she could have imagined. Thank you, Isaac murmured against her hair. For what? She asked. For giving me your heart. For building this life with me, for this child. His hand caressed her belly reverently. Sometimes I still can't believe you chose me. Catherine pulled back to look into his eyes, the eyes that had first caught her attention when all seemed lost. You paid for my freedom, she reminded him. But you earned my heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, Katherine Turner Daniels reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The rope that had once bound her wrists was now replaced by the golden band on her finger, not a symbol of captivity, but of the most liberating love she had ever known. In the growing darkness, Isaac lit the lamp that sat on the small table beside them, its warm glow a beacon in the gathering night. Like their love, it cast light where shadows had once reigned, offering guidance, warmth, and the promise of a new day to come. The child born to Katherine and Isaac Daniels that December was a daughter they named Eleanor Hope, in honor of Mrs. Miller and the emotion that had sustained them through their darkest times. She arrived during a rare desert snowstorm, her cries mixing with the howling wind as Dr. Miller delivered her in the Daniels' cozy bedroom. "She has your eyes," Isaac whispered as he held his daughter for the first time, awe written across his features. The baby's eyes were indeed green like Katherine's, set in a tiny face framed by wisps of dark hair that promised to be as black as her father's. "And your determination," Katherine replied with a tired smile. The labor had been long and difficult, but the moment Eleanor was placed in her arms, all the pain faded into insignificance. As Eleanor grew from infant to toddler, the Daniels' home expanded along with their family. Isaac added 2 rooms to the house and expanded the stables as his horse breeding business began to flourish. His reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread throughout the territory, bringing customers from as far away as California. Katherine continued her work with Dr. Miller, though she reduced her hours after Eleanor's birth. Her skill as a healer became widely recognized, and she specialized in caring for women and children, filling a vital need in the growing community. Redemption Creek itself was changing, transforming from a rough frontier outpost to a proper town. A school was built, then a larger church. The arrival of the railroad in 1879 brought new settlers, new businesses, and new opportunities. Through it all, Marshal Isaac Daniels maintained order with firm but fair enforcement of the law, earning the respect of citizens and travelers alike. Life wasn't without its challenges. Isaac's position still carried danger, and there were nights when Katherine waited anxiously for his return, Eleanor sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware of her mother's fears. There were droughts that threatened the horses, illnesses that swept through town, and the constant hardships of frontier life. But through every trial, Katherine and Isaac faced the world as partners, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. The love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances grew deeper and richer with time, nurtured by shared dreams and mutual respect. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Katherine with a gift that brought tears to her eyes. He had commissioned a locket from a silversmith in Tucson, inside which he placed a tiny scrap of the rope that had once bound her wrists. "To remember where we started," he explained as she examined it with trembling fingers, "and how far we've come." Katherine understood the symbolism immediately. The rope represented not just her captivity, but her liberation, the moment when one man's compassion had changed the course of her life. "It's perfect," she whispered, fastening it around her neck where it would rest close to her heart. That night, after Eleanor was asleep, they sat on their porch as they often did, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked, her head resting on Isaac's shoulder. "Paying all that money for a woman you didn't know?" Isaac's arm tightened around her. "Not for a single moment. Best investment I ever made." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Though I did get more than I bargained for," Katherine laughed softly. "A wife, a daughter, and a partner in all your schemes. Indeed you did, Marshal Daniels." "And I wouldn't change a thing," he assured her, turning her face up to his for a kiss that still held all the passion of their early days together. The spring that Eleanor turned 5 brought another addition to the Daniels family, a son they named Thomas Isaac, after Dr. Miller and his father. Katherine's second labor was easier than her first, and within weeks she was back on her feet, managing the household and caring for both children with characteristic efficiency. Isaac watched his growing family with a sense of wonder that never diminished. He had never imagined such happiness could be his a beautiful wife who matched him in strength and determination, a daughter whose laughter brightened the darkest day, and now a son to carry on his name and legacy. "You're staring again," Katherine observed one evening as she nursed Thomas while Eleanor read a story to her rag doll beside them. "Can't help it." Isaac replied with a smile that softened his weathered features. Sometimes I need to remind myself this is real, Katherine understood. There were moments when she too marveled at the life they had built together. From the ashes of her father's mistakes and Isaac's solitary existence had risen something beautiful, a family bound not by obligation or circumstance, but by a love that had defied all odds. As the children grew, so did the Daniels' place in the community. Isaac's position evolved from enforcing the law to helping shape it, as he was elected to the territorial legislature in 1884. His practical experience and unwavering principles made him a respected voice in the ongoing efforts to prepare Arizona for eventual statehood. Katherine's medical practice expanded as well. Under Dr. Miller's guidance, she obtained formal training during a 6-month stay in San Francisco, returning with new knowledge and techniques that saved countless lives in Redemption Creek and the surrounding areas. When Dr. Miller retired in 1886, he turned his practice over to a young doctor from back east. But it was understood throughout the community that Mrs. Daniels was the person to call for births, childhood illnesses, and women's complaints. Eleanor proved to be a thoughtful, bookish child with her father's quiet determination and her mother's compassion. Thomas was more adventurous, forever exploring the ranch and town, returning home with pockets full of treasures and a head full of stories. Both children thrived under their parents' guidance, growing straight and strong in the Arizona sunshine. In the summer of 1888, 12 years after Isaac had first cut the ropes from Katherine's wrists, a letter arrived that reopened old wounds. It was from a lawyer in Denver, informing Katherine that Jebediah Holt had died in prison, where he had been serving time for murder and kidnapping. Among his effects was a document acknowledging that Katherine's father had paid his debt in full 3 days before attempting to gamble Katherine's freedom away. He lied, Katherine whispered, the paper trembling in her hands. My father never sold me. Holt falsified the document. Isaac took the letter, reading it with a clenched jaw. That bastard, he muttered, forgetting to watch his language around the children. He had no right to you at all. Katherine sat heavily in a kitchen chair, emotions washing over her in waves. Relief that her father hadn't betrayed her after all, anger at Holt's deception, and a strange, unexpected grief for the years of believing her own father had sold her like property. Are you all right, Mama? Eleanor asked, her young face concerned as she sensed her mother's distress. Katherine gathered her daughter close. Yes, sweetheart, I just learned something surprising about my own papa from before you were born. Was he a good man? Eleanor asked with a child's directness. Katherine thought of her father, his weaknesses, his mistakes, but also his love for her and her mother. He tried to be, she answered honestly. Sometimes that's the best any of us can do. That night after the children were asleep, Katherine and Isaac sat by the fire, the letter lying between them on the table. Does it change anything? Isaac asked finally. Knowing Holt lied, Katherine considered the question carefully. It changes how I remember my father, she said slowly. It gives me back something I thought I had lost faith in his love for me, imperfect as it was. She reached across the table to take Isaac's hand. But it doesn't change us or the path that brought us together. Even if it began with a lie, what we've built is real and true. Isaac raised her hand to his lips. I'd pay that $200 1,000 times over to have you in my life, Katherine Daniels, no matter what the circumstances. Katherine smiled, the last lingering shadows of the past finally lifting from her heart. And I would choose you 1,000 times over, Isaac Daniels, in this life or any other. The news about Holt prompted Katherine to finally reach out to her Aunt Meredith in Sacramento. To her surprise, she received a warm response, along with family photographs and mementos she had thought lost forever. The correspondence rekindled a connection to her past that Katherine hadn't realized she was missing. In the spring of 1889, the Daniels family made the journey to Sacramento to visit Aunt Meredith. It was the children's first trip on a train, and their excitement was boundless. For Katherine, returning to California as a respected healer, beloved wife. And mother was a journey of vindication, proof that life's darkest moments could lead to its greatest joys. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Eleanor blossomed into a thoughtful young woman with aspirations to become a doctor, inspired by her mother's work. Thomas inherited his father's affinity for horses and justice, spending his days either in the stables or shadowing Isaac as he carried out his duties. In 1896, 20 years after their first meeting, Isaac and Katherine stood together on the porch of their home, now a substantial ranch house with a wide veranda and comfortable rooms. Their hair had begun to show strands of silver, and the lines around their eyes spoke of both laughter and hardship. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young deputy and the bound woman whose lives had collided on a dusty street 2 decades earlier. "Any regrets?" Isaac asked, echoing the question Katherine had posed on their 3rd anniversary. Katherine leaned against him, watching as Thomas led a spirited colt around the corral while Eleanor sat under a cottonwood tree absorbed in a medical text. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, every challenge led us here. How could I regret any of it?" Isaac's arm tightened around her waist. "When I saw you that day, bound and defiant, I knew you were someone special. I just never imagined how completely you would change my life." Katherine turned in his embrace to face him. At 43, she was still beautiful, the years having added character rather than diminished her appeal. "You saved me that day, Isaac, not just from Holt, but from a life without love." Isaac shook his head, his blue eyes as intense as ever beneath silver-streaked dark hair. "No, Katherine. You saved me. I was existing, not living, before you came into my life. You taught me what it means to truly love someone." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Isaac and Katherine sealed their enduring love with a kiss as tender and passionate as their first. In the heart of what had once been the wild frontier, they had found not just a home but a sanctuary, a place where the wounds of the past had healed, where dreams had taken root and flourished. From the ashes of captivity and loneliness had risen a love story that defied all odds, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the unyielding human capacity for hope. What had begun with a price paid in gold coins had become priceless, a legacy of love that would endure long after the last echoes of the Wild West had faded into history. In the years that followed, Redemption Creek grew into a thriving town, eventually becoming part of the state of Arizona when it achieved statehood in 1912. The Daniels family remained at its heart, their story becoming local legend, how a deputy marshal had paid for a woman's freedom and won her heart in return. And through it all, Katherine wore the silver locket containing that small piece of rope, a reminder that sometimes the strongest bonds are those we choose freely, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the cooling waters of love.